Hi everyone, welcome to Chapter 13, Safety of Our Food Supply. I will go ahead and lecture as usual for this week and make sure you guys have something to take notes with as you are following along. It will be really important for the final exam. Not only is this chapter important for a final exam questions and answers, but also for your personal information. I feel like right now in particular, safety in general and public health safety and all that, which includes food safety, is of utmost importance. So this is going to be a really important and timely chapter, I think, for all of us. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so there's a lot of slides in this chapter. Some of them we may kind of fly through, and some of them I will spend a little bit more time on, depending on what I want you guys to know for final exam purposes. Just to give you a little bit of background about food safety, it's kind of interesting because when you look at the dates here, 1906, wow, that's, over 100 years ago. Before that, there really was no rules in terms of food safety. I think people knew that they were supposed to cook their food and all that, but I don't think people really studied it before that in terms of, how long you should cook a food and what temperature and all that. So in 1906, that was when the first Food and Drug Act was started in the United States. And they believed that when food supply was relatively safe and when stored and prepared properly, that people were able to, kind of not worry about the fear of the food and in terms of getting sick. And I think, that's when this all really started. But even back then, it really wasn't much, and there wasn't much in place back then. So now, obviously, we have some very strict food safety laws. And I mean, to the point that, like, for instance, restaurants can get shut down if they're not following these procedures. So for those, I know we have a lot of students in our class that are currently working in the restaurant industry. And as you guys know, I mean, even if you're not behind the scenes um, in a kitchen, you know firsthand that there's inspectors that come in, sometimes unannounced, oftentimes unannounced, to check all these processes and procedures behind the scenes. So it's really, really important that restaurants stick to these guidelines. And right now, I don't know if you guys have done any takeout, but these restaurants are just, being super, super on top of all the food safety because of the pandemic that's happening. So it's really interesting to see that, kind of firsthand. We are now in the midst of all that. So you guys can, experience that as well. Okay. So this is just talking about kind of, again, history of all that. There used to be outbreaks of all kinds of horrible diseases. And that's kind of what led to the process of something called pasteurization. And Louis Pasteur, you may have heard of him before, is the guy who, the scientist, he was a very innovative scientist. He's the guy who created this process. And he found that when you heat food up to a certain temperature, a very high temperature, it kills all the bacteria and all the viruses and foodborne pathogens. And so he was kind of the first guy that started this whole process. And even to this day, we do that with food. One of the foods that you probably know, have seen this word before, is with dairy products. They do this very religiously with dairy products, pasteurized foods, and they do that to kill off all of the bacteria that may be present in the milk, the cow's milk. So it's anytime you buy raw milk, that is not a pasteurized food product. That's different. So that is unpasteurized. And actually, it's kind of a little fun food fact. Raw milk is one of the top food safety hazard foods in the United States when you look at like data and statistics. And so much so to the point that some states don't even allow the sales of raw milk. So it's kind of an interesting food. It has its own little category there. But the greatest health risks from food are viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites. And we're going to look at all of these different things. One of the assignments that you guys have this week, and I made it as an extra credit assignment because I know you also have your research project due this week. I didn't want to put too much on you guys. But if you have time, please do it, because not only is it worth 5 extra credit points, so that will be helpful for you, but also it's such a great assignment because you're going to get to learn about all the different types of foodborne illnesses that are out there. Some of them are major ones that you've probably heard of before, and some of them you may have not heard of. And it's kind of a fun assignment where you go on the discussion board posts and you create a little case study, and then you do not include the name of the foodborne illness, and then other students in the class try to guess what it is. And that's what we would have done in class for our in-class activity. And it's kind of one of my favorite weeks. Well, every week is a fun week, but just because you guys have a lot of fun with it and everyone's laughing, and it's just a fun week because we're trying to guess these different foodborne illnesses, and the stories that you guys give are really funny. So it's kind of a cool assignment if you guys can get to it. Okay, so this slide is really important. I do want you to know this slide. It's talking about basically the pathway from farm to table. So all the different steps and procedures that happen along the way, basically from point A to point Z, and how the food industry is trying to keep everyone safe from getting sick. So if you look at number 1 here under farm, that's when, food is grown kind of at the crops. That's the crop level, the farm level. And there's a lot of different things that happen there that they need to do to ensure safety. So one of the things that I can think of off the top of my head is just looking at this picture here. You're seeing plants grow out of the ground. That looks like to me maybe some green onions. And at this point, what they would need to do, the farmers and also the workers there at the plant, they would need to go ahead and check the soil, make sure that it's at the right pH level, which means that it's not too acidic, not too basic. It's right where it needs to be. You would also check the soil for contaminants, making sure that there's no bacteria in there. You would check the plants for contaminants. You would make sure that the workers themselves are clean and free from illness. Right now, that is really happening, as you guys have seen firsthand anywhere you go. If you go to a restaurant, even if in the stores, I mean, all these workers are wearing their masks right now, and some are wearing gloves and all that. So it's really important that that is in place as well, because if somebody is sick and they're working with the food, obviously that can stay with the food throughout the process. So that's, really important. So food companies generally are, pretty on top of that stuff, because there are inspectors that come in. Depending on the food that they have, some inspectors are there every day checking things. While some come maybe more a little intermittently, but it just depends on the food. The next step would be processing. So say now these onions go to the processing plant, which means now they're getting, cleaned, and they're getting chopped, and they're getting bagged, and, all that other stuff. So all of those processes need to have their own regulations. So for example, in the second picture here, let me get my pointer. You can, again, this looks like maybe some tomatoes or some bell peppers, and it's on machinery. The machinery itself needs to be swabbed and tested to make sure that there's no contaminants. It is cleaned daily, sometimes hourly, depending on the food. The workers themselves also need to make sure that they are free from illness, and that they're clean, and that they're washing their hands, and that they're wearing gloves, and that they're jotting down in their logs every single day, every single hour. They're checking the food. They're making sure the food itself is free from contaminants and actually looks aesthetically pleasing as well. That's one of the things here in America that we like to have. And as you guys saw last week in the food waste video, where there's lots of procedures in place to ensure that our food looks a certain way too. So, and there was a lot of comments about that too when I was just reading the assignments from last week, which was really good. So all of that stuff is taken into play here. Number 3, transportation. So now once the food has been washed and cleaned and cut and bagged and all that, now it's ready for transportation. So the truck that it's being transported in has to be refrigerated to a certain temperature. So somebody is out there logging that information. Somebody else is also out there making sure that the truck itself is clean. So they are swabbing that, doing swab tests. They're also sanitizing the truck to make sure it's good to go. Once it now heads over to the grocery store or wherever it's going to be sold, now the person that's receiving those items has to be informed that they're coming in, has to have a log ready to go, making sure that they're jotting the time, the temperature, what the food looks like as they received it. And so all of that is very heavily logged throughout the whole process, which is really important because if someone were to become sick or have foodborne illness when they get the food home, they can come back and now they can look throughout the process of where the food came from and to see where something went wrong, because that can stop the food illness from spreading to other people. So once it gets to the store, again, it's checked, it's logged. It's also stored right away. If it's a refrigerated item, it has to be stored right away in the refrigerator. So again, that's all being taken care of. And then number 5 is basically when us as individuals go to the store and we buy that food product and we bring it home, because we as individuals now have our own responsibility in terms of making sure that we don't get sick. So that would include washing it and how we prepare it in our own kitchen, making sure that we're using different cutting boards for different things, that type of thing. So that's all really important to look at. So this is a good slide to know because you probably should be aware of the different steps that take place throughout this process. This is crazy when you start looking at the statistics here. The CDC, Center for Disease, reports that foodborne illness causes 48 million illnesses, 128,000 hospitalizations, 3,000 deaths in the US each year. That's a lot. And just like now with our current pandemic, it's interesting when you start to look at public health and the trends. Very similar. The people that are most susceptible to becoming sick, this in general, but also with foodborne illness, are these groups of people. So infants and children, although with this pandemic, this is a different one. Older adults, anyone who has some sort of immune disorder, liver disease, diabetes, HIV/AIDS, cancer. Pregnant women are automatically put in the higher risk group category. Their immune system is automatically lowered when you become pregnant. We'll talk about that in the next couple of chapters. People taking immunosuppressant agents. So that would be somebody taking like a steroid for a long period of time. Anytime you take steroids, steroid type drugs. I know people think of steroids in terms of like, bodybuilding and all that, or, athletes. But I'm talking more about like somebody who has some sort of disorder where they have to take an ongoing steroid drug to suppress their immune system, because oftentimes if you have flare-ups inside your body or if you have some sort of inflammation of some kind, your doctor may prescribe that type of drug. So somebody who's on that, what it does is it suppresses your immune system on purpose so you don't have those flare-ups. And so unfortunately though, because your immune system is lowered, now you're more susceptible to foodborne illness. And then the last group, some affected by food allergies, seizures, blood poisoning from toxins. So anyone, again, that just generally has a lowered immune system for whatever reason that may be, they would be put more into this risk group. So that is interesting. When I saw the infants and children, they typically are on the risk group for any type of illness, but it seems like with this particular coronavirus that's going on right now, it doesn't seem to be targeting infants and children as much as it is with older people. Now, they are saying that, again, this is just an offshoot, they are saying that kids may be carriers, though. So even though they're not showing the symptoms, they still might have the virus. It's just not coming out in them like it is in someone that might be older or that has a compromised immune system. You don't need to memorize any of this stuff, so don't worry about it, but it's kind of interesting to look at. This is to show you, I love this actually in your book, it's to show you that there's all different kinds of agencies that are responsible for monitoring the food supply in the United States, which means we are doing a lot here in the US. We're really careful about all this stuff. Like I mentioned, there's inspectors that go into these food industry plants and they're inspecting things, and they're all different ones. So for example, if you look at this first one here, the USDA is generally, when I think of USDA, I think of like meat. So think of like animal products. They are in charge of those types of foods specifically, compared to if you go down to like the FDA is more seafood, which is interesting. So seafood is in a different category. Anything that does not have to do with meat in particular or animal products, the FDA is usually in charge of. Whereas the CDC is mostly in charge of food safety. They try to promote food safety. So they have educational programs for individuals. So that type of thing. The USDA, you may recognize that because if you buy like steak at the store or even chicken, you'll notice it has a USDA stamp on there. And that's basically telling you that the USDA inspector gave it its stamp of approval. So they were there, they were looking at the texture, they were looking at the temperature, they were looking at the general safety of the food product or of that meat to make sure that it was inspected and safe. So that's what that little stamp means. So why is it so illness? Why is it illness? Why is it so common? Why is foodborne illness so common? So here's the deal, is that even though we have all these agencies and all these inspectors in place, it still happens. In fact, if you guys were to do a Google search, every single day, some type of food is recalled. It's pretty crazy. We just don't hear about it. We hear about the large recalls where for example, I think it was about, 6 months, a year ago, there was a huge recall on romaine lettuce. And that was because there was something wrong with the lettuce. And so they literally recalled all the romaine lettuce in the United States. And there was also something about 10 years ago, I want to say, and that originated in, I want to say, the state of Washington. And there was a huge outbreak with E. coli in spinach in particular. And so spinach was recalled. All spinach was recalled. You may not remember that one. That was a little bit more longer ago. But so those things happen. And even when you go into grocery stores, sometimes they'll have posted, I know like in Trader Joe's, they're really good about this. They'll post signs at the checkout and they'll tell you food items that have been recalled. And so there's always something that is being recalled. We don't hear about it all the time. We just hear about those larger ones because there's so much food and so many people that it's just impossible to track every single piece of food that comes through. They do it in batches. So they try to do it in batches where, there's a group of food together and they'll check one little part of that batch and see if it's okay. And that's how they okay it and it moves through. So because they literally, no one person can literally check every single item that comes through in the food plant. It's just impossible. So they do it in batches. But, unfortunately, it's not a perfect system because people are not perfect, right? So there's always going to be that. So that's why it happens. And I think we're doing everything we possibly can. And, when it comes to us as individuals, we really are kind of like the ending point in how safe our food is going to be for us. So we'll talk about that. But there's all kinds of things like today, again, we do pasteurization, sterilization, refrigeration, freezing, irradiation, which is basically where you expose food to gamma rays. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but they do it to certain foods that are higher risk foods for foodborne illness. It usually happens with foods that are like spices and herbs and things like that because those tend to have problems with that. Our canning process, when you can food, what they do is they pull out the oxygen. So oxygen is one of the catalysts for foodborne illness. So they pull out the oxygen, they can it, and so it's all safe in there. Chemical preservation, there's a lot of food additives that they can add to food to make sure that it does not create an environment for foodborne illness. There's a lot of things that can be done. So food irradiation, I was just mentioning that. It's basically where you you expose food to gamma rays. And what it does is it breaks down chemical bonds, cell walls, DNA. It basically controls the growth of all insects, bacteria, fungi, and parasites. It's approved for certain types of foods, not many foods in the United States because it's still controversial and a lot of people are just weird. They feel weird about it. I think it's just the word radiation that people get scared of. And so there's not a lot of foods, but spinach has been one of the foods that's approved for this. Certain meats have been approved for this. You would know if your food has been irradiated if you see this symbol right here. So my cursor is over it right now. It looks like a little plant, so you may not even realize, oh, that looks like it's a healthy food, right? Well, it really means that the food has been irradiated. So that's what that means. So if it's something you want to steer clear of, and again, there's not many foods that have this, you would have to buy either organic or just make sure that the food product does not contain this symbol. I have to tell you guys, I've been around for a while and I don't I don't ever recall seeing this symbol on any food that I've ever bought in my years of grocery shopping. So it's a very limited amount of foods that they do this for. And typically it might be foods that are sold in large amounts, like to the restaurant industry. So if you work in a restaurant industry, you might see this more than somebody that is just buying food from a grocery store. Okay, this is really, 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 really important. Make sure you guys jot this down. I want you to know the temperature danger zone. So here's the deal about bacteria. Bacteria thrive in a particular type of environment. They love nutrients, they love water, and they love warmth. And because of that, if food is kept in the danger zone temperature range of 40 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, that is the range in which bacteria love to grow. So it's considered the danger zone. So it makes sense that when you are storing your food, you want to store it below 40 degrees. So typically, if you look in your refrigerator at home, usually most refrigerators nowadays have a built-in temperature gauge in there, but if you don't have one, you should go to the store and buy one, or get one from Amazon or something, and you just hang it in there, and it will tell you the temperature of your refrigerator. It should be 39, preferably 38 degrees Fahrenheit, but it should be below 40 degrees, because if it's above 40 and your food is kept at like 45 degrees, let's say, that is in the danger zone. And so bacteria is going to thrive in that danger zone. So you do not want to store it in there. Okay, or on the other end of the spectrum, if it's above that, so if it's, say, if you cook your food, but you're just cooking it to like 120 degrees, it's not hot enough to kill the bacteria. So that's why you want to heat food higher than that, generally speaking, okay? So there are certain ones like Listeria. Listeria is kind of in its own category. When you look at this in the book, Listeria is kind of scary because it's one of the bacterias that thrives typically in like milk and dairy products and also in deli meat. And particularly with pregnant women, Listeria is a problem because if you're pregnant, it can abort the fetus. And that's why they say if you're pregnant to maybe not have deli meats during that time, because if Listeria is in the deli meat, it can cause you to be very, very sick and ultimately cause that to happen. So we don't want that to happen. Okay, let's see, what else do I want to say? Oh, it says high temperatures kill bacteria, it doesn't deactivate toxins. Here's the deal. I want to talk about freezing, actually, because freezing, when you put stuff in the freezer, like if you're freezing meat, that does not kill bacteria. Let me repeat that. When you freeze food, it does not kill bacteria. The only thing it does is it slows the growth of bacteria. So that still means if that food had bacteria growing within it and you're putting it in the freezer, it's still there. So don't think if you take it out of the freezer, a week later that it's all good. Don't think that, because you still need to cook it to a certain temperature to kill that bacteria. Really, really important. And this is just showing you again the danger zone for bacteria. So remember, it's 40 to 140 is considered the danger zone. All right, viruses. Viruses I feel like we're hearing about viruses every single day, multiple times a day right now in particular, but viruses can survive in food as well too. Now, the good thing about viruses and food is that our stomach acid is so acidic that most of the time it will kill the virus and kill the bacteria. So that's the good news. However, there's certain times where the virus is just too much, or there's too much bacteria in the food, and our stomach acid will not kill it all. So that's when we tend to get sick. Now, with viruses, the one virus that stands out is something called norovirus. And norovirus was kind of a big deal a little bit ago, a couple years ago maybe. I don't know if you guys remember, I'm just mentioning the school because it's right down the street from our school. Chapman University actually had a huge outbreak of norovirus, and they thought it actually originated from the cafeteria. And so once you have norovirus, it's highly contagious actually. And it tends to aggregate in areas where people are close together. So it makes sense that you would have an outbreak maybe at a college campus if you have students living in dorms in close proximity, and also going to the cafeteria. So that's one of kind of the more famous, I would say, viruses when it comes to foodborne illness. And one of the places that it's also highly active is on cruise ships, which is interesting. Which is also interesting because we've heard about cruise ships and the coronavirus as well. It all makes sense. Anytime you're in a small confined area, you're going to be passing viruses back and forth to each other pretty easily. But where norovirus really aggregates is in long-term care facilities. So think of like nursing homes. These are places where obviously you don't want to have an outbreak because elderly people in particular have very lower immune systems compared to people that aren't. And when you couple that with any type of virus or outbreak, that's bad news. So that's where they've found a lot of norovirus outbreaks, unfortunately, is in long-term care facilities. The last category of foodborne illness comes down to parasites. And parasites obviously are not good. The one that stands out in my mind that you may have heard of before is something called tapeworms. Tapeworms are something that it's kind of a weird thing, but sometimes people will actually on purpose swallow a tapeworm because it lives inside of your intestines and it consumes the food that you're consuming. So people do not gain weight from it. Now, do not do this. This is not a technique that anyone should be using. You can get very sick from this, and it's not a good thing to have tapeworms living inside your digestive system. You have to take a specific type of medicine to help get rid of them, and you literally pass them in your stools. So that's not good. There's something else on here that I'm looking at, Trichinella spiralis. This is something that happens with pork. You may have heard of that before. That's not good either. And if you ever see something that looks like this in your food, please throw it out. Don't try to heat it up and continue to eat it. Obviously, if you see a parasite, sometimes you can see them, with your eyes. You should get rid of it. That's not a good thing. It's going to make you very sick. What a parasite is, if you're unsure, is it lives on, it needs a host. So once you consume it, it will live inside of your body and use you for food. So you don't want that to happen. Food additives sometimes are used as preservatives. So there's all kinds of preservatives and additives. Here in the United States, there's over 3,000 additives that are in our food supply. Isn't that crazy? 3,000. And a lot of those additives are in the forms of preservatives, which help to preserve the food. So it creates a longer shelf life for that food product. Food companies love these because it helps them to create a higher revenue, basically. They're going to generate more money. When they have food that lasts a longer period of time on the shelves, then they can go ahead and it comes along with expiration dates and all that other stuff that we learned about last week with food waste. But that's really going to help them with creating a food product that lasts longer on the shelves. They don't have to worry about the food safety of it as much. So a lot of food companies will use these. Now, some of these preservatives are actually natural preservatives. For example, sodium is a perfect example. Anytime you add sodium to food, it preserves the food. So it makes it last longer. A lot of people like sodium the way it tastes. I remember from looking at your diet analysis a few weeks ago that it really helps with the taste of food. Most students, not all, but most students were over in their sodium levels. That's a pretty normal thing, I think, to happen because sodium is put in so much of our food supply nowadays for that reason. Sometimes these additives are intentional and sometimes they're accidental. For example, it doesn't say on here, but sometimes like bugs will actually get into the food supply and we are allowed to have a certain number of bug parts within our foods. Peanut butter, for example, there's an upper limit level to how much bug parts we can have in our peanut butter. I know it sounds kind of weird, but some of these things, and it's not going to hurt you, but some of these things are accidental. So, and it's a very small amount, you guys. So I don't want you to worry about bug parts in your peanut butter, but I'm just giving you an example. So there's something that I do want you to know. It's called the GRAS list, GRAS, and it stands for, right here, generally recognized as safe. Generally recognized as safe. Make sure you jot this down. This is a specific list that is put out by the FDA, and the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is responsible for adding or removing products or food products on that list. And it's been around for a long time. It's been around since 1958. So you can imagine this list is pretty darn long. And what it's good for is when a food company goes to create a new food product and they have a certain additive that they want to put in their food, they can check this GRAS list, and if it's on there, that's mean it's already been approved. It's gone through the safety inspection. It's been tested for human safety. Everything's good, and they can go ahead and add it to their food product, no problem. Now, here's the problem with this list. It's been around since 1958. So some of these foods that we thought were safe, that have been on there for years, are now starting to pop up in question because now they've been around for a long period of time, and we've done more testing over the years, and now we're starting to figure out that maybe they're not as safe as they once were. So for example, there's certain dyes that have been removed, red dye number 3, because now through years of testing, we've come to the realization that red dye number 3 is not safe. They've actually had multiple studies that show a connection between red dye number 3 and cancer. So now that we know that, the FDA has actually pulled it from that list. So food companies are not allowed to use this anymore in their food products. They have to use other types of red dye. So red 40 is considered to be a safe one. You probably have seen that in food products. And there's other ones that are now coming up in question. For example, nitrates. We've talked about this in class. Nitrates are the additives that are added into deli meats and to like hot dogs and sausages because it gives it a certain flavor, and it also provides that shelf life aspect as well. So a lot of food companies like to use it. The problem with nitrates that we're seeing now, though, in terms of the health of and food safety, is that we're starting to see a connection between certain types of cancers and nitrates. So some individuals are opting to buy nitrate-free hot dogs, nitrate-free meats and foods for that reason. So I've noticed a lot of grocery stores, regular grocery stores, Ralph's, Vaughn's, Pavilions, all those, they're all now providing foods that are nitrate-free meats. And a lot of people are choosing to buy it. The problem with this, though, to keep in mind if you buy this, is it's only good for like 3 days after you open it. So once you open the package and air has now been exposed to that food, you need to consume it within the first 3 days. Otherwise, it goes bad. So you have to keep that in mind. So anytime you need an approval for a new food additive to be added on the GRAS list, you have to go to the FDA. And the FDA has to then do, safety testing and purposes, and you have to make sure that it's safe, and the company has to make sure that it's safe, and it's just a process. So a lot of food companies don't like to do that. They just want to go directly to that list, see that it's already been approved, and then move forward. There's also things that can cause illnesses in terms of natural things. For example, mushrooms. Here's the picture of mushrooms. You never want to go into your backyard, pick mushrooms, and eat them because that can cause all kinds of issues. If you look up mushroom toxins, liver, kidney failure, coma, and death. So you do not want to do that. That's a bad choice. Also, some other things that are found in other foods, for example, oxalic acid. So it's found in spinach, which, spinach is very healthy. I've actually heard of some individuals that are like doing juicing a lot, and they're putting massive amounts of spinach in there, and they're doing it every single day, sometimes multiple times per day. And what's happening is now they're having kind of a toxic effect of this oxalic acid that's naturally found in spinach. And that can overload your kidneys and cause kidney issues. It also binds to calcium and iron, which means that it will stop the absorption process from happening of those two minerals. So there are some things, that can happen with that if you're overdoing it. I don't want you guys to be afraid of eating spinach or eating strawberries because they're very, very healthy for you and very good for you. This is if you're doing it in excess. So there are some natural substances that can maybe cause some illness. in certain individuals. Caffeine can be somewhat of a concern for some people. I know in our exercise chapter, we talked about caffeine and how that can be a natural stimulant that can help you with performance. Now, there's different types of caffeine, obviously. There's the naturally occurring type that's found in like tea, green tea, black tea, white tea, and in coffee. That is considered to be, pretty good and actually healthy for you if you're having it within, a kind of a normal, moderate type of amount. But if you're having caffeine in excess, where you are getting jittery and you're feeling sick and you're feeling nauseous and getting headaches and rapid heart rate, that's not good. Because some people, and it really depends on the individual, and it's a genetic thing. It doesn't say here, I don't think. But caffeine, the way it's processed genetically, is different for each person. So you would know if you had a cup of coffee and you're feeling very anxious and you're feeling sweaty and you're feeling your heart is racing, that means you're very sensitive to caffeine. If you have a cup of coffee and you don't feel any of that stuff, then you're probably not as sensitive, and it's okay for you to have a cup of coffee or two throughout the day, and that can actually be healthy for a lot of people. But for some individuals that are very sensitive to it, it's something you want to steer clear of. Just in general, guys, coffee is very acidic. So if you are having these issues, I would switch over to green tea. Green tea is very beneficial for you. There's a lot of great stuff that comes with green tea. It has a lot of antioxidants, but it will also provide you with a little bit of natural caffeine as well. So it shouldn't cause a lot of these yucky things that come along with caffeine if you're just having like a cup per day. So that can be something you want to try. Okay, I just kind of went through that. Pesticides. Okay, so this is where we're switching gears here a little bit. There is something that I want you to be familiar with in terms of organic foods. And if we were in class, I would ask you guys about something called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. Now, this is from 2013. This is an old table. An old chart here from the book. But I urge you guys, they have an updated list. If you go on the internet, you can search just type in Dirty Dozen, and there's a website that'll pop up. And every single year they test fruits and vegetables, and they tell you which ones are the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So let me back up here and tell you what this is. So with foods, with fruits and vegetables, just, in agriculture in general, as you guys know, they have to use pesticides. And so pesticides are important for farmers and crops because it helps to save the crop. If we didn't use pesticides, everything would die because of bugs and insects. So there's a few things that they've done to get around this. Now, the problem with pesticides, let me show you the other side. The problem with pesticides is that they can be hormone disruptors. They can cause problems with the reproductive system. Some of them have been, known to cause cancer. So obviously, pesticides in that respect are not good. So here's the deal. Last week we talked about genetically modified organisms. One of those things that comes along with that is a genetically modified organism that basically creates a food or a fruit or vegetable that naturally staves off bugs and insects. So that would be kind of a positive to GMOs, right? Now, there's the other side, is that they do have fruits and vegetables that naturally do not need a lot of pesticides. So they're considered to be kind of clean in that respect. So that is what the Clean 15 is. They're fruits and vegetables that do not require a lot of pesticides and herbicides in order to grow. So these are all considered to be green light foods if you wanted to go ahead and buy non-organic fruits and vegetables. So let's talk about what organic means. Organic means foods, and I know we talked about this in one of our classes already, but it's just foods that do not, that aren't, that you don't use herbicides and pesticides. There's no hormones. There's no sewer sludge that's involved. There's certain criteria with organic foods, fruits and vegetables. So no antibiotics is the other thing I was thinking of. So these are all clean of that, okay? So you don't have to worry about that stuff. So asparagus, avocados, cabbage, cantaloupe, cauliflower, sweet corn, eggplant, grapefruit, kiwi, mangoes, onions, papayas, pineapples, sweet peas, sweet potatoes. Again, look at the updated list. It should be pretty much the same though. Every year they do update it, but there might be one or two fruits or vegetables that they switch out. The Dirty Dozen, so the Dirty Dozen, these are basically the top foods that require a lot of herbicides and pesticides. Apples is always at the top of the list here. I always see apples every single year. So keep in mind, this does not just mean apples. It also means apple juice, apple sauce, etc. So anything made with apples. I always personally like to buy organic apples for our house because I know that it's the one fruit that they do need to use a lot of herbicides and pesticides on. So I choose personally just to have organic. Now here's the deal. If you're in a situation where you're on a budget, you do not have enough money, there's two apples sitting there, you have the organic apple and you have the regular conventionally grown apple right in front of you, and you don't have enough money to buy the organic, I want you to buy the regular apple, because studies have shown that if you're faced with a decision like this, that it's always best to buy the regular conventionally grown fruit or vegetable rather than not buying it at all, because when you start looking at the benefits and the risks, the benefits of that apple are going to outweigh the risks of the pesticide. That apple is going to provide you with all the fiber and the antioxidants that you need to help stave off diseases. So that's better for you than not having it at all, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the whole deal there, if you wanted to look at it that way. And I always like to, there's certain I like to go to Trader Joe's because I feel like they have cheaper things there. I also like to go to Costco. That's where I get a lot of my fruit and vegetables, quite honestly. And Costco now provides a lot of organic fruits and vegetables, which is awesome. Another thing I like to do, this is a good little tip, is that if I feel like we're kind of low on money that month and I don't have enough money to buy the organic, I'll turn to frozen. Frozen fruits and vegetables that are organic are even better for you, I know it sounds crazy, than the fresh fruits and vegetables. Because what they do is they freeze them the second they pick them. So all the nutrients are contained in that fruit or vegetable and it's frozen. So by the time you eat it, it's all good. In fact, you're getting more nutrients than you would if you buy the fresh version. So frozen is actually a great choice if you wanted to do that. Canned is a whole other story. Canned is not as great. So by the time it's processed and canned, it's lost a lot of its nutritional value. Okay. We've talked a little bit about mercury in fish. And that's one of the things you got to keep in mind with fish and seafood, that, you have to be careful with that. So salmon, we talked about salmon. Salmon is a great choice overall for so many different reasons. It's low in mercury, it's low in contaminants, and it's really high in those omega-3 fatty acids. So that would be the fish that I would absolutely recommend. Okay. Here's the organic symbol. We've actually talked about organic before, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but just as we talked about, I would keep in mind the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. Make sure you guys know what that means. Okay. Let's see here. Talk about organic, locally grown foods. Basically, locally grown foods are great because you are lessening the contaminants in the air, less pollution. It's good for the environment. You're buying stuff that's locally grown. Oftentimes, like farmers markets are actually organic fruits and vegetables, but they can't label it as that because the labeling of organic means it's a process. You have to go 3 years at least with soil that's organic. There has to be an inspector that comes out. It's very costly. So a lot of local farms that are just like, small businesses choose not to label themselves as organic, even though they might be. So you'll have to go to farmers markets and ask them there what they do and how they grow their fruits and vegetables, when we can go back to doing that again, obviously. Let's see here. Talked about that. Preparing food. Okay, so there's a lot of things you can do at home. I think this is really, really important for you guys to know. There's a lot of things you can do at home to ensure your own food safety. Okay, obviously, I think all these things probably make sense when you look at them. wash your hands thoroughly. There's actually a certain way to wash your hands. I feel like right now in the news and in the media, I mean, everybody's talking about how important it is to wash your hands. You're supposed to do it for at least 25 seconds, sing happy birthday twice to yourself. That's kind of the rule. If you can do that. I love this. Don't follow the 5-second rule. And I've actually seen this before no joke, I've seen this before in restaurants where people have dropped food on the ground and they pick it up and they go ahead and still prepare the sandwich. This happened to me personally, and I stopped the guy and I said, sorry, I can't. Oh, that's on my shoe. That doesn't matter. The shoe's still dirty. You can't make my sandwich. Like, so, like that 5-second rule doesn't mean anything. I know it's something that a lot of people joke about, but in those 5 seconds, there's still contaminants that still get on the food. So be careful with that. Obviously avoid coughing and sneezing over food, make sure that you're washing your fruits and vegetables thoroughly. That's really important. If there's mold, you don't want to eat food with mold on it. I think all these things are common sense. The one thing that I do want you to be familiar with, though, and this is honestly for your own personal information, if you guys do not have a meat thermometer, please buy one. It doesn't even have to be, not a meat thermometer, just a food thermometer, I should say. Please buy one. I just got a new one a few weeks ago, and I love it. I use it all the time. It's so important because when you're cooking meat, you want to make sure that you're cooking it thoroughly. And this is a great little just tip right here, this little first bullet point. Beef and fish should be to 145 degrees. Pork is 145. Poultry, which is considered to be the quote dirtiest meat, is 165 degrees. So when you're cooking like chicken, for instance, it's really important that you're getting it up to 165. Now, what I personally like to do is I get it up to like 160, and then I take it off of the heat, however I'm cooking it, and it will continue to rise after that. So, and it usually will get to at least 160, if not more. So that way it's not drying the chicken out, but it still tastes good. You know that it's safe. So that's a really good, I think, rule of thumb for everybody. Okay. Leftovers. Okay. The rule of thumb with this is that if it's left out and it says 1 to 2 hours, there's even like, if you start looking at data and statistics, if you even go like 3 or 4 hours, that's the rule of thumb, throw it out. Because if it gets to that time, then it's too long. Bacteria is starting to thrive. So be careful of that. The book has a great little cooking temperature chart here that you might want to just, I don't know if you can maybe like photocopy this or print this little slide out. It's a great guide to have. I mean, obviously you can look it up on your phone or in the book, whenever, but it's a great chart to look at for all foods when you're cooking food. Okay. Storing food, obviously you want to do it under 40 or above 140 if you're like keeping foods hot, which makes sense because that's the temperature danger zone. Anytime you're reheating food, you want to reheat it thoroughly. So make sure you're getting it to a high enough temperature where you're going to kill off that bacteria if any has grown again within the refrigerator. That's really important. Okay. And this is just showing you when in doubt, throw it out, and the storage time for foods. Okay. Please, please, please make sure you guys are jotting this down. These are the 4 safe core food practices of individuals. Really, really important. Okay, so let me go over this. Clean. Obviously, this means clean your hands, wash your hands, clean the area in which you're going to be utilizing the space for cutting and chopping and preparing the food. So important. The second one, separate. Separate your food. You do not want to be using the same cutting board for your vegetables that you're using with your meat, for example. In restaurants and sometimes in people's homes, if you guys have this, you have different colored cutting boards. So easy because you can use like the green cutting board for vegetables and you can use the red cutting board for meat, for example. So it's really important to separate your food. Cross-contamination is the #1 reason why people get sick in restaurants. So what that means is you're using, again, the same cutting board for 2 different foods. Or for example, this happened personally to me once when I was with one of my friends. We're at a restaurant. She's highly allergic to shellfish. She specifically told them, I'm highly allergic to shellfish. Please do not use anything. The guy said, okay. She got her food. She didn't have any food that had any shellfish in it itself. But later that night, I think it was like a pasta dish, she had welts all over her body. And what that means is that the pan that they went to go, there was some sort of cross-contamination. The pan that they went to go put the pasta in had previously been used for some sort of shellfish. So she had a reaction. So it's really, really important that you're, not doing that cross contamination for a lot of different reasons. The next thing is cooking. Make sure you're cooking your food to the certain temperature that needs to be cooked at. Really important. I just showed you that list a couple slides ago. And then the last thing is chilling. Make sure you're chilling it and bringing it down to a certain temperature to make sure that it's all safe. So that's basically it for the food safety chapter that I want you guys to know. If you guys have any questions as we're going through, make sure to let me know. And otherwise, have a great week and we'll keep in touch. See you guys online.